Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the PsySSA Student Division's next webinar series in our Ask Us Anything continuing series. Today, we are focusing on sports psychology, and we are very fortunate to have Professor Leon van Niekerk with us. Professor van Niekerk is a counseling psychologist and a sports psychologist from the University of Fort Hare. If I may ask everyone to please mute themselves. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get into the webinar. The questions were submitted via email and on social media to Ashwin. Ashwin forwarded the questions to Professor van Niekerk. Prof is going to answer the questions that were submitted previously, and thereafter, if there is time remaining out of the 1 hour that we've got for this webinar, we will open the floor to other questions and for participants to join in. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat box, or you may send me a private message in the chat box if you would like to remain anonymous. We'd like to thank Professor van Niekerk for joining us and taking time out of his very busy schedule, and to thank Ashwin for organizing this, and of course PsySSA head office, particularly Fatima Sidat and Mohammed Qasim, for allowing us to use the Zoom platform. We are going to go ahead. Prof van Niekerk, if you would like to get started.
Yes, thank you so much. It's such a privilege to be here among all the youngsters and everybody that is excited about sports psychology. Maybe just a small introduction, if that is necessary. I'm Professor of Sports Psychology at the University of Fort Hare. I have been with the University of Johannesburg for 15 years prior to coming to the Eastern Cape, which I enjoy so much. Beautiful scenery, beautiful environment to work and to live in the University of Fort Hare. So I'm employed on the Alice campus, which is a rural space about 118 kilometers from East London. So it is quite hot here today, and you are joining me with a very hot topic. You said sports psychology. I am going to go through all the questions you sent me one by one, if that is in order with you.
Thank you, Prof. That would be perfect.
Good, good. So I don't know what your arrangement is, but if anybody wants to have a follow-up question or so on, I'm sure we can deal with that afterwards, or maybe everybody is welcome to just butt in and stop me for a moment to expand on something if it's necessary.
Thank you very much, Prof. We appreciate that.
Great stuff. Okay, so the very first question was, how do you become a sports psychologist in South Africa? The bad news is you cannot. And I will tell you why. Because in South Africa, the Health Professions Council only provide licensing for psychologists in 4 categories. The one is for counseling psychology, the other one is for clinical psychology, one for education psychology, and one for industrial psychology. And I know neuropsychology has also recently joined these ranks. So there is no category registered with a health professions counselor where we can register anybody as a sports psychologist. So anybody who is saying that they are a sports psychologists in South Africa is actually misrepresenting, because there is not such a category. I myself am registered as a counseling psychologist, but you can also register a field of specialization, which in some instances, and some colleagues have done so, indicate that they are specializing in sports psychology. So I did my master's degree training and I'm a registered counseling psychologist. But to equip myself for sports psychology, I went to Belgium and I enrolled for a master's degree in sport and exercise psychology there. So if you do want to continue your education in sports psychology, very few universities in South Africa cater for that. Some might have a module or two in the undergraduate program of psychology. Some of them might have a module on sports psychology in their human movement science programs. For most of the universities in South Africa, I cannot vouch that there are any training programs to become a sports psychologist. I know that the University of Stellenbosch had a PhD in sports psychology. So that was for registered psychologists who want to also continue with studies in sports psychology. But at the moment, I don't think that that program is running. So the bad news, there is no sports psychologist in South Africa. There are, however, people in South Africa who are registered in other countries as sports psychologists. So there they can work as sports psychologists, but they cannot work in South Africa as sports psychologists. They need to be either registered as a clinical, counseling, educational, or an industrial psychologist. So yeah, so how do you become somebody interested in sports psychology in South Africa? Well, I would say if you're done with your training as a counseling or a clinical psychologist, you either have to train or teach, educate yourself in the field, or do a program in any other country that provides for that matter. So I hope I answered the question as full as I could. So let me move on to question number 2, which asks, do you need to have a sporting background, or for that matter, sporting experience, to become a sports psychologist? It would help. It would help a lot if you understand the context of sport, especially if you have some training in sports science as well. Because what we teach and what we know and what we apply from a sports psychological perspective dovetails and integrates with a lot of sports science. So the question would be, where would sports psychology resort then as a field of interest? Would it be in the psychology department at a university? Or would it fit better in the sports science or human movement science department of a university? Well, we have both models in South Africa. The university I am with hosts sports psychology in the human movement science department, while where I come from at the University of Johannesburg, they host sports psychology in the department of psychology. And you will find various of these models at other universities in South Africa. So my suggestion is, if you are going to engage in sports psychology as a field of interest or a specialization field working as a psychologist, my suggestion would be to capacitate yourself with at least a few modules in sports science, so that you know exactly what is happening in the sports scientific approach to sports psychology. So it's all about the mental preparation of the athlete, but first and foremost, this person is an athlete. And you have to understand the context of an athlete and the context of the performance of an athlete and what it requires, what it entails, what the scientific preparation of an athlete entails to really connect well with that athlete when you have sessions with the athlete. Unless it is purely clinical psychology, you're seeing an athlete for depression and you're treating depression as a clinical psychologist, or if you have sessions on the career development of an athlete. Those models follow more or less the same pattern as when we would have seen anybody else with those kind of themes in counseling or therapy. But working with a team, with an individual athlete, preparing or assisting an athlete to prepare for the Olympic Games or for international sport, or for local sports at provincial level, even at school level, it would help to know the sport a bit more. Because once you know those intricacies of a specific sport, you would know what the mental challenges are and would be in a better position to assist the athlete to adapt and adjust some of the psychological skills that is necessary to deal with those pressures or situations a bit more effectively. So yeah, it would help quite a lot if you have a background in sport or some experience in sport. It will really assist you tremendously to be able to foster a working relationship with the athlete and co-construct effective intervention skills for the athlete to deal with specific pressures or specific requirements on and off the field. So let me move on to question number 3. Would studying counseling psychology or clinical psychology be a better route for budding sports psychologists? Now, if you are interested in the field of sports psychology, you will have to stay within your scope of practice, regardless whether you are a counseling psychologist or a clinical psychologist. So for me, the whole idea of mental skills training, the whole idea of psychological skills training of athletes, where there's an educational program where you educate the athlete about a specific skill, assist the athlete to acquire the skill, and then apply the skill in a competitive context, suits the counseling psychology field much better. But if you are going to deal with the difficulties and the pressures and the mental pressures associated with performance, like anxiety and depression, it will be more suitable to have a clinical psychology background to assist the athlete in that regard. So I will be hesitant to say study the one or the other. It doesn't matter which one of the two you eventually are registered for, either as a counseling psychologist or a clinical psychologist. You will be able to assist the athlete with mental preparation and dealing with the difficulties coming from a competitive environment appropriately. So I don't favor either one of the two. So I think it would be just sufficient to say, regardless whether your interest is to be registered as a counseling psychologist or a clinical psychologist, you will be able to assist the athlete effectively in the sporting context. I also know of some colleagues in the educational psychology that assist athletes from that perspective, especially the skills training perspective. I also know of a colleague or two from industrial psychology that assist athletes, especially in the team context, how to deal with some of the pressures coming from working in a team, becoming an effective team. Because much of what we learn in sports psychology and what we do in sports psychology can also be transferred into the world of business, in the world of music, in the world of academic performance. So much of the themes that come up in sport as a specific field of occupations, you will find that there is a lot that can be transferred to other areas of life and other fields of interest like business or education or music and arts and culture. So anything that requires some form of performance, a sports psychologist or somebody who is interested in it or an expert in the field can also assist in those fields. So question number 4, considering that it may not be, or it may not be the only part of psychology that one can practice in the country. So I don't know of a sport, okay, let's say in inverted commas, a sports psychologist, a psychologist that work just in the field of sport. But I do know of a psychologist that work just in the field of psychology. So I don't know of a sport, let's say in inverted commas, a sports psychologist, a psychologist that work just in the field of sport. But I do know of a psychologist that work just in the field of psychology. So most of the colleagues working in the field of sports psychology in South Africa are currently working at universities, and some of them are in private practice. So how would you best supplement sports psychology, considering that it is not part of the psychology training program that one can do in the country? So for me, it would be, if you are, say, for instance, a counseling psychologist, you will occasionally work with athletes and teams. So as a counseling psychologist, it would be in your interest to also run your practice recruiting or doing work with other types of clients as well. I am not sure that you can make a living in this country just working in sports psychology. I might be proven wrong, but most of the colleagues I know supplement their sports psychology work as counseling psychologists with other fields within counseling psychology, and the clinical psychologists with some work in the field of therapy and addressing the clinical issues of clients. So the best way to run your practice, or the best way to supplement your practice, is to market yourself with all your fields of specialization that you also are interested in. And that way you can successfully run a practice with a specialization field of sports psychology, but also supplementing your income and your work in other fields of the specific registration category and your scope of practice. So let me go to number 5. What is the scope and outlook of the profession in South Africa? Now, in South Africa, there are very few people working as psychologists just in the field of sports psychology. So the scope and the outlook for now is minimal at first, but it is a field that is quite rapidly gaining interest of athletes and coaches and sporting federations. Some of us have been involved with the preparation of athletes for the Olympic Games, for the African Games. Some of my colleagues are also now invited to join the Indigenous Games and local competitions. Some of the colleagues are contracted with specific rugby teams. For instance, the Springbok rugby team and the Blue Bulls and Lions. Myself, I've done some work with some of those provincial teams. So yeah, the scope is increasing, but there is still this hesitancy that athletes have to consult a psychologist, because often, you know, there is this stigmatization of athletes when they consult a psychologist, as if there is something wrong with you. And in that population, in the athlete population, especially also among coaches, it is constructed as a weakness if you consult a psychologist, because of that stigmatization that there's something wrong with you, or something is wrong with your performance that needs to be addressed. While sports psychologists and sports psychology, for most of the part, comes from a positive perspective, where we want to focus or enhance the performance of an athlete. Yes, sometimes as psychologists working in the field of sports psychology, we have to address difficulties or how to deal with specific pressures in the field of sport. But for most of the time, most of the work that I do with athletes and teams are either developmental or focused on the enhancement, are healthy and well, the mental health in a very good condition. So consulting somebody in the field of sports psychology is an added advantage to gain that mental edge that you might have over other competitors in preparing yourself mentally to be as effective as you can be on the sporting field. So yeah, the scope at the moment is quite limited, but the outlook is promising because more and more athletes and coaches are opening up towards the industry to get involved. Unfortunately, it's quite expensive. Unfortunately, there are no possibility to employ you full-time as a sports psychologist or an expert in psychology in these teams. I'm working at an academic institution, so if I join some of our national teams for the mental preparation that needs to be done, I cannot go with them on tour. Sometimes when they leave the country, they tour to a world championship or to a World Cup event, or even the Olympic Games would require you to be there for a month at least. And I don't know that universities and other workplaces are willing to accommodate you for a month, pay you for that while you are assisting a team. So all these kind of practical issues needs to be addressed to open up the scope and the outlook for the profession even more in South Africa. But I think it's gaining more and more scope, and the outlook is becoming much more promising in South Africa. Question number 6, what is the most frequent psychological issues that athletes face? Well, the ones that come across my table and my consultation room, the one that I see most often is the one, how to deal with nerves and anxiety. You know, most athletes have to develop those skills to regulate their arousal levels. Now, the arousal levels that we talk about is emotional. It could be anxiety, it could be aggression, it could be any emotional aspect of the competitive environment that becomes dominant. And then how to deal with that, how to tone that down, how to relax and compose yourself to be calm and collected, thinking properly about what you're going to do in the heat of the moment is one of those themes that comes up most. So for most of the athletes that I saw, it was all about arousal regulation and teaching them arousal regulation skills, how to deal with anxiety, how to deal with nerves in crucial stages of the match. So cognitive behavioral therapy helps in that regard, quite a number of skills that you can utilize from that perspective. But another approach that's gaining more and more field, and which I'm also involved with research at the moment, is mindfulness, especially the combination of mindfulness, acceptance, and commitment. Those 3 therapeutic approaches is proving to be very successful in dealing with these arousal control issues that they have to face in the heat of the moment during competition. From coaches and other athletes, confidence is also an issue. You know, when you're in a competitive situation and you have a few mistakes occurring during a game, you make a few crucial mistakes that costs you a game, or some crucial mistakes in the process that leads to losing a few games. Nothing more than that you need to chip away your confidence slowly but surely. So maintaining self-confidence during a season is a very important aspect to consider and assist athletes with, especially when they lose a game. I think in one World Cup event of our rugby team, they lost against Japan with a huge margin. I mean, Japan has only recently started to play rugby, and they beat the Springbok rugby team. So how did they deal with that process was a significant intervention for them to assist them to see that in perspective, to regain their composure, and to reassess and to re-acknowledge their self-confidence as rugby players. So yeah, athletes often lose their confidence, making a small mistake or losing a crucial match that we can assist them to regain their confidence and reaffirm their self-confidence. Concentration is another problem. You know, often athletes say to you that the coach is standing there next to the field and just shout, "Come on, you guys, concentrate." But they never indicate to the athletes what they actually mean. Do they mean get the correct information, focus more on the information? You are missing a few important sets of information before you make a decision. Do they mean focus on your options and select your options more carefully? Don't just do the same thing all the time. Focus on what you do and how you react. Do they mean concentrate on how you execute the skill? So understanding the idea of concentration, what it can mean, and how you convey a message properly in your team to the athlete so that the athlete gets the correct instruction is also one of the issues that regularly come across my table, which is concentration. And then another one that I can recall is dealing with injury. You know, an injury can end a career of an athlete in a second. So when they get an injury, they could be out of the game for a few matches. They have to regain their fitness, and it can easily exclude them from a season of a specific competition that they are in. So it is a very anxious, provoking, and a very serious emotional process for them to go through to deal with injuries. So often it is about dealing with the injury, going through the shock experience, going through the denial, going through the anger and the depression and the negotiation that comes with it. Often, you know, they will, after a week, negotiate with a coach, with a medical doctor. Can I not play Saturday? I feel good. I feel okay. But then they are not match fit yet, so they have to wait another week. But they often want to get into it quicker than they should. So to help them to deal with that experience of waiting and recovering and going through their rehabilitation program properly is often some of the support that we can provide them. And I often do that because I'm working with some athletes that have injuries that really finds it difficult to deal with it. If they are out of the sport and they get that news that they can never participate in sport again, it's devastating. And how then to end that career and make a transition into something else often becomes a challenge. And then, of course, motivation. Usually motivation is not such a big problem, but often, especially kids, lose motivation to participate in a specific sport or a specific event, and then to assist them and address those issues are very important. Now, working with kids, it is usually dealing with a parent in that regard, because a father who would like his child to play soccer or wants his child to play rugby, and the child don't want to, the child's not interested or motivated, is something we have to deal with. Because that child also has a right, you know, not to participate or to be forced to be participating in anything. So yeah, those are some of the issues that come across my table. Then I have also worked with abuse in sport, sexual abuse in sport, physical abuse in sport. You do get coaches overstepping the boundary, disrespecting athletes, grooming them into sexual relationships that is inappropriate, and then assisting the athlete or the team or the coach in that regard to deal with that issue is also something of importance. So if you ask me what is the most frequent psychological issue, I would say there is not one, but there's a cluster of issues that often comes up that we need to deal with. Question number 7, What are the common psychological theories used in sports psychology? Well, every field develops its own theories when you talk about the explanation of specific behavior. So the explanatory models in sports psychology is often developed within the specific field of interest. Like for motivation, in motivation, there are quite a number of theories helping us to understand how and what motivates athletes. The self-determination theory, the achievement goal theory, those are some of the new ones that comes to mind. In leadership, there are quite a number of theories on leadership in sport, on aggression, on spectator violence, on mental preparation, on anxiety. How do we explain anxiety and its relationship with performance, like the inverted U hypothesis? So it depends on which field you are working within sports psychology. You will come across quite a number of theories that are utilized. Initially, it would be the theories that explain the behavior from a personal or an individual perspective, like the drive theories. But you know, psychology also taught us that it is not just the characteristic of the individual that determine behavior. Behavior is also impacted by the environment that the individual is in. So you had some theories within those fields designed and developed just to explain the behavior from an environmental perspective. But recently, the newer, more applicable theories in all of these fields are combining and integrating personal and environmental factors in the explanation of behavior in sport. So when we talk about the explanatory models or theories in sports psychology, those integrative approaches where personal and environmental characteristics are integrated are the ones that we focus on primarily. But if you talk about the applicatory models, those models and theories we use for therapy or intervention to apply something to change the athlete, change the mindset or the behavior of the athlete. When we target change within that sporting context, the most researched and most utilized theory is cognitive behavioral theory. So for most of the research and most of the interventions in sports psychology, you will encounter cognitive behavioral therapy or approaches to change the behavior of athletes. But more recently, phenomenological theory has also gained a lot of interest in sports psychology, won a lot of field in gaining and creating possibilities for its application, especially when it's around the experience of the athlete, the experience of competitive environments, the experience of performance, of winning, of losing. So the phenomenological approaches or theories are also gaining a lot of field. But now, the more modernistic, postmodernistic approaches, like the ones I already mentioned, mindfulness, acceptance, and commitment therapies, is also claiming some space in the field of application in the field of sport. So mindfulness, acceptance, commitment is also a theory or a group of theories that is claiming significant space and also providing promising results for us to utilize that as a very important theoretical or approach to consider within the sports psychology field. So those are the common psychological theories that we use in sports psychology. And let me get to the last one. I see it's almost 40 minutes already. What are the areas of interest in sports psychology in South Africa? Well, for most of it, it was mental skills training. So many coaches latched onto this construct called mental toughness. Now, mental toughness is a psychological resource that you build up and develop in the athlete that's made up of quite a number of skills for motivation, for concentration, for self-confidence, for concentration, those kind of skills that put you in a position to deal with the pressures and the tasks required to achieve in competition. So mental toughness is a psychological resource that makes you more effective in executing your task. So many coaches latched onto that idea and consulted sports psychologists or people in the field of sports psychology to address that within the context of the development of their athletes. So the area of mental toughness is one that gained a lot of ground in South Africa. But now recently, with some of the athletes also come out in the open about mental health issues in sport and abuse and those kind of themes within the sport context. The idea of mental health is also gaining a lot of interest at the moment. So the mental health of our athletes should be considered by coaches and the sporting environment quite significantly. For most of the time, it is stigmatized, seen as part of a weakness within the athlete if they have or if they disclose that they feel depressed or that they are anxious or that they find it difficult to sleep or that they have psychological distress issues and they find it difficult to deal with the stress. So more and more athletes are now in public recognizing the difficulty of dealing with mental health in the sport context. And I think that is also gaining a lot of momentum in South Africa at the moment. So yeah, apart from many other fields of interest where colleagues are doing research specific in their field of interest in the sport, in the sport psychology field, like for instance, the development of sport or athletic identity, and those kind of things are also to the fore. And I think, you know, that in general, quite a lot is done in South Africa at the moment. Quite a number of interests are addressed. But the primary ones that are still here coming from coaches and federations is the idea of mental toughness, mental preparation, and now recently, mental health of athletes. You guys, let me put a comma there for now. I've shared a lot of information with you up to now, and maybe there might be an information overload now. I hope I did not say too much, but yeah, let me hand back to the chair of the meeting, and if there are any other questions that are coming up, I will be more than willing to address them.
Thank you so much for that, Prof. You've certainly covered a wide range of topics and issues within sports psychology, and you've touched on, which I personally did not know, that one would also include ed psychs and industrial and organizational psychologists, which for me, I had this assumption that it was only counseling or clinical. So to hear of this, I think would also give a lot of budding, let's not call them sports psychologists, but psychologists who want to go into the field of sport, a lot of hope that one can approach it from various different registration categories. And I know there was a great deal of excitement towards the end of 2020 when neuro became an HPCSA registration category, and everyone's holding fingers and crossing whatever one needs to cross that sports psychology will be next. Would you mind sharing a little bit of your journey into this field? You have such depth and insight and very clear passion for it. What made you, have you always been interested in this? How did you get into the field of sports psychology? Prof, I think you're muted.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll be more than happy to share my journey with you. Initially, I started studying theology. So for many years, I was an ordained minister, and I always say sports psychology found me. I did not find sports psychology. So when I got the opportunity to do my master's degree in counseling psychology, one of the modules, coincidentally, was in sports psychology. And studying the topic in my master's degree really generated a huge interest for me in the field. And I realized that there are quite a few people in South Africa that were involved in the industry at that stage. Now I'm talking late 90s, which is about 25 years ago. So I connected and collaborated with many of those that I could find at that stage that were working in the field. And for most of it, it was a process of self-learning. We had to engage, even the lecturers teaching the module sports psychology at the University of Johannesburg, who coincidentally developed an undergraduate program, a bachelor in sports psychology, that would give you that background of sport and sports psychology entering into a master's degree in clinical or counseling psychology. We're relying on self-study. So we capacitate ourselves through those programs with a lot of knowledge in the field. So once that opportunity came my way at the University of Johannesburg, I applied as a lecturer teaching the sports psychology program, because I think at that stage I was the one who knew most about the field, and they were looking for somebody specific to teach on that program. So yeah, that's how I got engaged. So my research interest grew in the field, and I realized, for me to also improve my own skill and my own approach to the field of sports psychology is to go and study somewhere else. So I enrolled for the European Masters in Sport and Exercise Psychology, which is a European program which I did in Greece and in Belgium. So I graduated from the University of Leuven in Belgium with a master's degree in sport and exercise psychology, which included coursework and a research project. My research at that stage was in sexual abuse in sport, which was actually at that stage something that was come to the public, quite significantly through athletes opening up and acknowledging that this was happening in sport. So we tried to understand that context and understand how it happened. And my research was focused a bit more on that. So I completed that master's degree in 2007. And since then, I've been supervising masters and PhDs in sports psychology themes specifically, especially for those in the counseling and the clinical programs who want to venture in the field of sports psychology. I've been the external examiner of many of these masters and PhD programs that were also included at other universities. I know at the University of the Northwest University, they also have Professor Peter Kruger, who is there, who is a qualified sports psychologist in England, who in South Africa is a clinical psychologist, who also do a lot of work in expanding and promoting the field of sports psychology. But my journey primarily went through the universities, first University of Johannesburg, and then now recently for the last 6 years through the University of Fort Hare. My journey also involved, contributions to national, international athletes in South Africa, assisting them with their mental preparation for the Paralympic Games, for the Olympic Games, for national and international competitions in swimming, in golf, in football, in rugby. So especially netball as well. I did a lot of work with some of our netball teams, our national netball teams, some of the coaching programs for netball. So that was very interesting. I also had the opportunity to work with referees. And, you know, it doesn't matter whether you are an athlete or a coach or a referee, even a spectator, you can benefit a lot from psychology in that field, especially with regards to the performance required of you to be an effective athlete, to be an effective coach, and to be an effective referee, so that your performance, when it is scrutinized, is above board, not due to mental failure or difficulty, losing concentration or self-confidence or those kind of things. You know, so I assisted quite a number of athletes and coaches and referees in the field, learned a lot from them in the application of sports psychology. And that is basically my journey through the field of research and teaching and the application in workshops and working with athletes. That is my story. That shaped me in terms of who I am and what I'm doing at the moment.
And that is certainly a fascinating story. It's definitely not linear. Sort of, I did this undergrad and then I did this master's, and that's how I got into it. It's certainly well-traveled, and as you said, starting off with theology. So I really appreciate and love what you said when you said that sports psychology found you. And that sounds like it's for you a calling rather than just a job. And that also comes through in the way you speak about it quite passionately. You touched on earlier sexual abuse and inappropriate behavior in sport. And then interestingly, you mentioned that that was part of your thesis, or that was the topic of your thesis. In recent years, we've seen a spate of sexual abuse allegations, even on an Olympic team level, where sports people have come out and said that their coaches have abused them. It seems to have been sort of coincide with the Me Too movement, that maybe more people are finding their voices now and coming out and saying this happened to me. On that kind of level, would you then, as a sports psychologist, counsel those individuals who have been violated by coaches? You spoke about motivation and mental toughness and how perhaps ongoing abuse, I mean, how would that really affect a sports person? It's amazing that many of them carried on and really excelled despite what was happening. Would you then come in and counsel them? How would one approach that?
Yes. Yeah, it's a very sensitive, very, very sensitive topic to deal with in sport. It is the sad part of the sporting context that there's also this dark side in sport. Now, sport is designed from a positive perspective, where you can gain physical and psychological health benefits from it. Then, you know, dealing with people and dealing with disrespectful people in that environment also opened up this whole context of the dark side of the sport context, where psychologists can make a difference. You know, when we did this research in Belgium, we found that about 17% of athletes that participated in that study reported what they evaluated as very serious and unacceptable behavior from coaches. Coaches either threatening to drop them from a team if they don't have sex with them, or promising them a position in the team if they would have sex with them. We are also aware of some cases that came to the fore that were in the public in South Africa, especially one of the more recent ones with Bob Hewitt, who was found guilty in the tennis, as a tennis player and a tennis coach. But if you look at the research, the grooming of athletes into sexual abuse and having sex with coaches inappropriately starts at a very young age. And obviously from that position of abuse of your power as a coach, a child would very often be in a vulnerable position and have to deal with this very serious disrespectful behavior from coaches. And they might not have a voice at that stage because of the threats that comes with it. And the way coaches deal with that, to keep it a secret between them, and the manipulation and the threats that comes with it, which then lead to a very sad story in that process, where it will continue without that athlete disclosing it because they don't feel they have the power to do it. Sometimes their parents don't even believe them when they disclose it. Now, with more of these cases coming to the fore, parents are also a bit more vigilant. But most of these athletes will find a voice of power with the movements that are now gaining a lot of interest worldwide, to verbalize that abuse of power and the sexual abuse that occurred when they were children. And that delayed response is often part of this sad and dark side of the sport industry, where this kind of abuse happens. How do we deal with this? And I have been involved with some athletes that were sexually abused, some as minors. Well, as a psychologist, you have to disclose that first and foremost. So you disclose it to the parents, you disclose it to the say the federation that is involved, you disclose it to the lawyers of those federations that works with it, and then they deal with it from there. Because I want to focus on the counseling that needs to happen for that athlete to deal with the sexual abuse that occurred. So in terms of dealing with that process, the therapeutic process that is best suited for that athlete is the one that one would follow. But you know, you have to be very careful, and you have to be very sensitive. Try and set up an effective working relationship. So as a man, being the therapist, working with a female athlete that has been sexually abused, it provides the opportunity to also model an appropriate working relationship to that child, how this should be and how this could be. But for some of the times, I have referred the athlete to a female therapist because of the sensitivity of the content of that abuse, and just being a bit more comfortable to address the issue with a female therapist is something also that needs to be considered. If you have the ability to foster a working relationship and a therapeutic relationship with the athlete, then by all means you can continue with it and engage with a therapeutic model and the therapeutic processes that is well suited for that specific athlete to deal with the issues that emerge due to the sexual abuse that occurred in that young athlete's life. Let me put a comma there for now.
Thank you, Prof. That is, and yeah, sure, it's a lot for you to go through as well, to have to deal with, as you refer to it, the darker side of sports psychology, but it is a reality. Do you have any advice for our aspiring, we're not going to call them sports psychologists, but individuals who would like to get into the field of sport psychology? throughout their academic degrees, or to enable them to stand a better chance of making a success. You did touch on supplementing one's income, and that it's not a full-time job. And again, mental toughness comes to mind, because as we know, psychology in general is a highly competitive field, especially masters. Any words of wisdom, caution, anything that may help someone who's interested in this field? I think that's probably quite a long conversation as well. Sorry to throw this in at the end.
Yeah, no, it is for sure. It is for sure a part of a bigger conversation. But my advice would be, in short, in a nutshell, keep your interest alive and capacitate yourself through other means of teaching and learning as well. My other advice would be to jump into the deep end. If you are training in your first master's degree here, ask your supervisor, ask your program director to also engage your sports department at the university to refer athletes to you. So go out there and market and publicize yourself as somebody who's interested in the field and willing to assist athletes at the university to help them deal with some of these pressures. Your psychology training will equip you well for it. You just got to add that finer nuance and how it is applicable within a sport field and for a specific sport context. So jump in at the deep end, go and market yourself and get involved in the sport department of your university. Go to the rugby coach, go to the hockey coach, go to the director of sport at your university and tell them about this possibility that you're interested in the field and that you're doing practicals and you would really like to engage and make yourself available for working with teams and working with athletes to enhance their performance and equip them with psychological skills to help them deal with it. That's how we learn to apply what we know. So you will be supervised in your first year by a psychologist in your field that will guide you through that and that will supervise you properly in that field. If you are in your internship, also negotiate to engage in the sport context wherever you are. Start implementing maybe exercise programs if you want to use exercise as a means to intervene in a specific community. Exercise is therapy. We often in our training tell our students, well, psychologists learn how people think, how they feel, and how they behave. But we never include the body and how exercise and fitness of that body provides a lot of scope for the psychologist to assist that client with the physical and the mental health or the psychological health benefits that just come from exercise. So take initiative and go to communities where you do your internship and set up exercise programs, work with a sports scientist in that area and jump in the deep end and focus your research in this field and develop your skills while you are being trained as a psychologist. Learn to apply your skills also in the sport context. So in summary, that's the kind of advice that I will be giving to young budding interested psychologists in South Africa.
Prof, and certainly words of wisdom and words of encouragement, which I think so many students and aspiring psychologists need to hear, knowing how tough it is to get into these programs. I don't see any other hands raised or questions in the chat box. So if anyone else has any questions, we're 1 minute over already. This is your quick chance. 3, 2, 1, no. Okay, Professor Leon van Niekerk, it's been an absolute pleasure attending this webinar with you. Again, the PsySSA Student Division and Media and Marketing Subcommittee thanks you for your generous time today and for shedding light, as we said at the beginning, on this mysterious field of sports psychology. I've certainly learned a lot. We appreciate this. And to all of our participants, thank you for being here. To Ashreen, bless you for organizing this and going out of your way for us. And to head office, particularly Fatima Sidat and Mohammed Qasim, thank you again for the ongoing support. We will be sharing this to YouTube and to our website. There we go, a few messages. Thank you, Professor, very informative, very insightful. Prof, again, thank you. We wish everyone here a good almost weekend, and Prof, all the best with your marking masters and PhDs. We appreciate it. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.